It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. As every Thursday, my name is Dr. Amr MABROUK, and Engineer Samuel Samir, our sound engineer, is for today. And we're coming live from Studio 325789407, and you can reach us on our direct line. And today we are going to do the world of books. You know the rule of the game. The rule of the game is that I present 3 of the books that I read quite recently, and I'm giving you the advice. Should you read it, skim it, or toss it? And you know, of course, I'll tell you that if I took the time to read the book, I think the book deserves to be read. And that's why I'm trying to summarize the book, give you the idea behind it, and definitely exchange and do some food for thought. So, you're still listening in with the world of info, the world of books today in such a hot summer day in Cairo. The weather is hot, but the topics are much hotter because definitely we are talking about 3 books that deserve to be read. And I think the 3 books really deserve to be read, especially if you are not specialized in their subject. And definitely the effort that the 3 authors have done in their way of writing these books definitely deserves to be accredited, and at the same time giving them the chance to explain to you some of the important points that you might have never known before. And the first book is by Salah Isa, the one and only Salah Isa. He was a very famous writer and a man who has been more or less a leftist. We are not going to say communist, but leftist, and he has been in and out of jails during the 60s and the 70s, and he is a very cultured man. And I'm speaking in the present tense in spite of the fact that we lost him a few years back, because definitely Mr. Salah Isa is living in the pages of his books, in the pages of his articles that he has written through all his colorful career. He was a very highly cultured man, and definitely a very dedicated man to reading and writing, and especially about Egypt. And when we talk about one of his books, I think this is a trophy, and it is called The Men of Marg, the story of the Ottoman conquest of Egypt and Syria. The second book is by Muntasir Amin, and it's called The Last Pharaoh. And of course it talks about King Pharaoh, although the writer is carefully designating it as a novel, not as a historical novel, but just as a novel, with a picture of King Pharaoh in a very young age in front of his palace, looking very much handsome and in a very beautiful outfit, looking great, hopeful, and full of ambitions and hope and things that he definitely, within just few years, lost, beside losing his own throne. And the third book is by Aisha Sultan. She is an Emirati writer, and she's saying, writing some notes about cities, traveling, and leaving. And I think it's a very nostalgic book that deserves to be read, because it tells you the story of travel and the story of Dubai when it was a small unknown city in the Gulf back in the 60s and the early 70s, when the author of this book was a quite young lady then. So the 3 books that of today, the world of books and the world of info. After the break, we'll start right away with the mammoth work of Salah Isa. So we start right away with the world of books, and coming from the world of info. A beautiful book that carries inside its pages a lot of sadness and a lot of sorrow. A sadness that if only they won, if they could have won this battle, if they survived this battle, if they fought much harder, if they thought that they could do it, if they had the belief to defeat, if they had the strength to fight, if they were not betrayed, if they were survivors, not victims, maybe things would have changed. Yes, this is the story of Marg, the battle that occurred between Selim I, the Ottoman Emperor, or the Ottoman Caliph, and Qunso al-Ghuri, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the Sultan of the Mamluk dynasty, the Sultan before the last, if we consider his nephew Tumambai to be the last. Yes, the story goes, the myth goes, that Qunso al-Ghuri was defeated. He lost the battle in front of the Ottoman Caliph or the Ottoman Sultan, and because of the loss of the battle, Egypt and Syria and the whole of the Mamluk Sultanate or kingdom became part of the past, and it became part of the Ottoman Empire. Selim I controlled Egypt, and Selim I was the conqueror of Egypt. And unfortunately, Egypt was defeated, and Egypt passed in a period of stagnation from 1516 till the reign of Muhammad Ali in 1805 when it started. So these hard times that brings a lot of sorrow to any Egyptian or a nationalist Egyptian. When he reads these pages, he has to have a lot of courage, stamina, and at the same time capability to survive reading these bitter pages that explains to you why Egypt was defeated. Why Egypt was defeated from the very start with the discovery of the route of good hope, when Egypt, instead of becoming the route of commerce to the West or to Europe, now everybody was taking the route of good hope towards India and back to Europe, and therefore the monopoly that the Egyptian king or the Sultan of Egypt had over the commerce or the commerce of the whole old world was not in his hands anymore, and Egypt entered slowly in a period of decay from the late 1490s till 1516, when Egypt was dying economically, strangulated and strengthened the rope and the knot around the neck of Egypt. The Sultan was suffering from empty banks or empty boxes, and therefore he could not afford to build a strong army to defend Egypt. His Mamluks were, as always, ambitious and greedy, refusing to give in part of their salaries or part of their allowance to maintain the poor and the desperate times of Egypt at this dangerous period. And the Ottomans were in the strength of their army, and they were the founders of the new technology of the gunnery and the guns, and they had the music that could really start roaring behind the troops, giving courage to the invaders and giving weakness and fear to the defending army. And on that day, when Qunso al-Ghuri went to a sleepless night waiting for the morning, he had the inside feelings of defeat. He felt in his old age that he is not fit to fight this fight, and he was lacking the will and the courage. Maybe he was courageous enough to take up the army and make the last stand to save the Egyptian empire or the Mamluk empire, but at the same time he didn't know, or he couldn't calculate, the risk of having traitors within. No one but traitor, as the Prince Khair Bey, one of his assistants, and the one who was controlling one wing of the army, the one who started giving information to Selim I about everything, and at the time of the battle, at the crucial timing of the battle, he gave in and went to the Ottoman side. And in no time the Sultan was surrounded. And although he was trying to defend his throne and to defend his kingdom, he had a stroke and fallen from one of his horses, and he was never found again, alive or dead. And this was the start of the great defeat in Marg, beside in the Syrian part. And when the Selim I went back, or started his way strongly and fastly, steadier towards Egypt, trying to get the heart of the kingdom, the heart of the Sultanate, aided by the biggest traitor of all times, Khair Bey, the man who was nicknamed after that by Khain Bey, or the traitor. And Khair Bey was assisting Selim I, knowing all the points of weakness of the Mamluks, and knew that the Mamluks are going to betray Tumanbai, the last Sultan, the nephew of King or Sultan Consort Ghuri, the man who was courageous enough, brave enough, kind enough, and modest enough. And at the same time, this man who the authority has befallen on him when he didn't want it, and then he started to defend Egypt from Raidaniya, which is near Al Abbasiyya now, that is in the outskirts of Cairo. He was defeated, outnumbered, and outflanked by the Ottoman Empire or army, led by Selim I. So there was the encounter between Tumanbai and Selim I. Tumanbai started making a sort of attacks of his small units that stayed with him loyal, and started attacking the Ottomans from different directions, causing to them a lot of nuisance. And unfortunately, he was betrayed by one of the Bedouins, to whom Tumanbai went for asking for him for protection, and he gave him in for the Ottoman king. And when the Ottoman king, to whom Tumanbai, the last Sultan of Egypt, was brought, there stood Tumanbai with full strength, full power, and full bravery, telling the Sultan, "Why did you come to invade me?" And the Sultan, Selim I, said to him, "Why did you attack me, or why did you go to battle against me, when you know that I am the Sultan and I am the conqueror of Egypt?" So Tumanbai said to him, "This is my country, this is my kingdom, and you are the invader, and you are no better than me. I am much braver than you, and I am more knighthood than you are. And if you think that you are stronger than me, come down now, and let's fight each other like two knights in shining armor, and we'll see who is going to defeat the other." And of course, Selim I liked the way that Tumanbai talked in, and he was starting to consider sparing his life and making him as a sort of governor of Egypt under his authority as part of the Ottoman Empire. But the sneaky Khair Bey did the second betrayal, went to the ears of the Sultan and said to him, "If you spare his life, he's going to return, and he's going to throw the Ottoman rule, and he's going to bring to life the Mamluk Sultanate again." And so Selim I decided that he is going to put or hang Tumanbai, and for him this will be the best solution. And there goes Tumanbai, the last king of Egypt, the last Sultan of Egypt from the Mamluks dynasty, the Borgi Mamluk. And as he was stepping bravely to the gallows of Zuwayla gate, the main gate of Cairo, the southern gate of Cairo, and he stood in the gallows in front of his executor, and he faced the Egyptians who were crying and weeping for the loss of their king, and said to them, "Please pray for my soul. Please read the Fatiha for me 3 times. And he started reading the Fatiha 3 times on his soul, and then he looked to the executor and said to him, carry on with your job. And with the death of Tumambai, the Mamluk kingdom came to an end or a halt, and Khair Bey was given the trophy to become the governor of Egypt under the Ottomans. A job that he didn't enjoy too long, because in few years he died and he was buried in his own mosque and tomb that he built on the road to the citadel. But for the Egyptians, he will be always considered not Khair Bey, but Khain Bey. And Khain Bey means the traitor. His mosque, which is a beautiful piece of art, having a beautiful sabil that was always stuffed with water as you hardly go to in your way to the citadel. To go to the governor, you have to pass by the tomb of Khair Bey. The Egyptians, because they hated Khain Bey or Khair Bey, decided to make another route for themselves to go to the citadel, and stopped passing by the gates of the tomb of Khair Bey. And if he is brought to the memory of any of the Egyptians or the contemporary Egyptians at that time, he was not receiving any prayers to rest his souls, but prayers for God to let him go to hell where he deserves to be. Well, Salah Isa mentioned in full details these hard days. He mentioned the hopes and the despair, and he mentioned the treason and the lives and the times of these men who fought in Marg, the men who fought honestly and the men who betrayed, the men who stayed and the men who escaped. Yes, a great book speaking about a very hard times, about the destruction of a kingdom and about the loss of a king. صلاح عيسى رجال مرج دابق قصة الفتح العثماني لمصر والشام. صلاح عيسى, the men of Marg دابق, the story of the Ottoman conquest of Egypt and Syria. A book that deserves to be read with all the bitterness that carries in its pages, but with all the love that we carry for Salah Isa, for his beautiful prose as he goes in these pages, making things so dramatically shown in a beautiful sequence of events, although these are very bitter events. So you're still listening in to the world of books and coming from the world of info. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Samuel Samir is on the controls, and we are coming live from Studio 3. Stay with us. You're still listening to the world of info, and today is the world of books, and we're coming live from Studio 3. And our second book of the day is The Last Pharaoh by Muntasir Amin. Well, this is a lot of irony in this word, or in this sentence, or in the name of the book, because Pharaoh was actually named Pharaoh the First, and actually he is really the Pharaoh the last, because the dynasty of Muhammad Ali ended with his son, who was an infant king. His name is Ahmad Fuad II. So Pharaoh was definitely the only, or the Pharaoh and only, the one and only, or Pharaoh the last. And yes, when we talk about Pharaoh, we'll definitely speak a lot about incidents and coincidence, and about the way his life and his life of his family, his close family, has been winding like a Greek dramatic effect, or what they call, it's more dramatic than any soap opera that you could ever pretend that you have watched or you have despised. No one can really stigmatize or read the story of King Pharaoh, then he would say, wow, this could not be a true story, this could not happen in real life, this is blah blah blah. Yes, it is a very strange story. The son of Fuad, who was the son of Ismail Pasha, And he was, Ismail by in turn, was the son of Ibrahim Pasha, the favorite son and the great leader of the Egyptian army and the founder of the modern Egyptian army, the son of Muhammad Ali Pasha. So the man, presumably, has a lot of intelligence and a lot of charm that he would have inherited from his great-grandfather, or from his grandfather, or from his great-great-grandfather, Muhammad Ali, which unfortunately he didn't inherit. The man has good looks, definitely. When he was young, he looked as a very elegant and handsome young man. And with the death of his father at his age, at his young age of 17, being an orphan king or an orphan prince or king-to-be, everybody had a lot of pity, and I think a lot of Egyptian families in the year of 1936, 1937 and 38 had their children called under the name of Farouk, because people really loved him. They loved his looks, they loved his smile, they admired his younghood, and they liked everything about him. And they all pitied him because he was orphaned in such a young age. But things were not going right. First of all, he lacked the proper education because his father died prematurely, and his mother insisted that he comes as soon as possible to hold the throne. Otherwise, the old cousin of his is going to be the crown prince, is going to be the king and take up the throne. And by this I mean Muhammad Ali Tawfiq. So for them and for everyone would say, no, we don't want Muhammad Ali Tawfiq, who is the elder cousin of King Pharaoh, to become the king of Egypt. And so Nazli, the mother of Farouk, fought hard to make Farouk king as early as possible. So the victim was Farouk, because he didn't finish his studies, he didn't finish the education, and he had only very minor education. He had no exposure to cultured people, and even the tutors who were teaching him were not up to the standard. This was the grave mistake number one. And grave mistake number two, that he was young enough when he went to the throne. And grave mistake number three was that everybody considered him to be the king. And the grave mistake number four is that King Fuad, his father, when he made or supervised the making up of the Constitution of 1923, made the intention and the whole intentions to make the king not just a real puppet king, but a king who controls the ministries and who could kick out the prime minister, and he could dissolve the parliament. So it was a pure authoritarian kingdom with the king on the helm of power, and not just as a sort of a public figure, but effectively an absolute ruler. So here we are, a man, or a very young man, who is not properly educated, a man who has no experience and no cultural exposure, is now the absolute ruler of Egypt. And the people around him were directing to him towards killing any probability of a good democracy, and preventing, with the dislike that he started to have to Nahas Pasha, the leader of the majority of Egyptians, the Wafd party, and he started to have a great hatred towards Nahas, and therefore we find King Pharaoh committing a mistake after a mistake. Power is not kind towards people who are abusing it. And with the 1942 February incident, when Farouk was threatened by the ambassador Mike Lampson, the High Commissioner to Egypt, the British High Commissioner of Egypt, to return to either abdict or give the prime minister job to Nahas Pasha. So these were critical times. The death of Ahmed Pasha Hassanin, he was his own chamberlain and advisor, and at the same time rumors has it that he was the husband of his mother, All this with the death of Ahmad Pasha Hassanin in a terrible car accident. King Pharaoh started to lose his own compass. And not only him who lost the compass, but also his mother, who started to have her own life, the life that she was kept inside the palace for 20 years during the reign of her husband. Now she was doing everything in the book to make herself back into her teenage years. And unfortunately, this led to a great disaster. So, disasters on the family level and disasters on the political level. And King Pharaoh, after the car accident, started losing his shape as a beautiful or as a handsome gentleman into a more morbidly obese man who prematurely lost all of his hair and looked quite old for his 30 years that he's carrying on his shoulder. So these were hard times. King Pharaoh was rapidly losing his reputation, losing the admiration of the people, and losing, most important, the sympathy of the Egyptians. And as I remembered when I asked my father, were you, who was then during the last days of Farouk, and on the early days of 1952 he was a captain in the Egyptian Royal Medical Corps, did anyone shed a tear as Farouk was leaving the palace for good to exile? My father said, no, not a single person was shedding a tear. And this proves that people, you can lose the asset that you have with the people in spite of the fact that you were a great king and a great start with a lot of mistakes that you are committing. So after the break, we'll talk more about the life and the times of King Farouk. So, what made Farouk lose all his popularity with the Egyptians? What made the people, the Egyptian people, who were really admiring the young prince and looking to him with great hopes and looking at him as a son, a brother, or a father with great admiration? Just in 1937 and in 1952, they were very much happy to lose him as a king. Well, as I said, definitely Farouk was a victim of his bad upbringing of his father when he kept him inside the premises of the palace, not putting him in a school or a public school or a public private school where he could meet peers from the same standard of him. This he was denied. Also, he was a victim of his mother, who was kept herself in the jail of the palace, or the golden cage. When the king died, she had the chance of her lifetime to get her freedom back. When she has fallen in love with Ahmad Pasha Hassanin and got married to him, as the rumors has it, who was the chamberlain of the king, and then by the death of Hassanin in 1946, she got out of control. She started traveling abroad, having careless way of appearance, even made her daughter fall in love with one of the proteges who was a young employee in the foreign service, and getting married to him in spite of the fact that he was from a different religion, and not accepting the advice of her son or advice of the royal court or advice of everyone, that the king had to dethrone her during his reign, and to get also remove the rank of his younger sister Fathaya, because she married without accepting his opinion, and therefore the whole family was falling into great disgrace. And at the same time, the advisors of Farouk were not the advisors of the high standard. Some of them really hated Nahas Pasha, who was the leader of the majority and the leader of the Wafd party, a man of great credibility, a very kind-hearted man, a nationalist, a lover of the country, and a real patriot. But unfortunately, they were not working on the same wavelength And Farouk hated Nahas Pasha very much. And when you start to hate the leader of the majority, therefore you start making mistakes. And if you start attacking the leader of the majority, who is Nahas Pasha, at the same time making him an enemy, then by time you become an enemy of the people themselves. He was not having real good or true friends, and started to have friends from a lower status, or even using his personal assistants, right? For example, the barber or whatever, who acted as his own secretaries, and even promoted them to an advisor. And Bulli, who was just a barber, turned up in the end of his life, or his tenure as a king, as a great advisor with the rank of a bey. And when he was asked by the revolutionary forces that he should give in and get out Bulli from his entourage, he said, please keep him, as if Bulli is a true and a good friend of him. Well, these are very bad stories. He tried very much hard to have a son of his own, to get this son the job of the crown prince, and therefore get rid of his cousin Muhammad Ali Tawfiq, the crown prince. Unfortunately, he had 3 consecutive daughters from Queen Farida, and life between them has changed bitterly. Of course, when a 17-year-old gentleman gets married to a 16 or a 15 years old young lady, definitely their type of characters or persona are not that mature. So they started to have a lot of fights and a lot of disagreements that ended up by a royal divorce. King Farouk then decided to get married to a very young girl who was almost half his age. And strange enough, he had from her a crown prince that he was expecting very much. The crown prince came very late in 1952, the 25th of January. And on the 26th of January, there was a great party celebrating the birth of the Crown Prince Ahmed Fuad II. And unfortunately, this was also the date that Cairo was burned, for due to reasons that nobody really knows up till now. With the incidents of burning and looting of Cairo in the 26th of January, this was the start of the last knot in the coffin of the Egyptian royalty. In July 1952, the Egyptian army went to the streets and declared emergency rules. The 26th of July, 3 days later, King Farouk was ordered to abdict from his throne. He made one phone call to Khafri, the ambassador of the United States to Egypt, and the answer from Khafri was, I think, Your Majesty, you should sign the abdication statement. And this was the end that Farouk himself was responsible for part of it. His father was also held the responsibility, and his mother definitely held the responsibility. The wrong advisors and the wrong times. And I think everybody has betrayed Farouk, even himself. And when we look back at this period of time, we have to go back to history and say there are a lot of books that were written about Farouk. Perhaps the most researched one was by Dr. Fatma Salim, which was her PhD, talking about Farouk. And it's very hard when you find that there's almost 500 pages talking about Farouk from the day he was born until 1952. And then you can hardly find just 30 or 40 pages from 1952 till his strange way of death in 1965, indicating how people could lose very easily their importance in such very few years. So, The Last Farouk by Muntasir Amin carries to you a glimpse of information about King Farouk. If you need to read more, you find a lot of sources talking about Farouk, but definitely the lives and the times of Farouk is a real soap opera. It's a drama saga that definitely needs to be examined thoroughly, and from it we can learn a lot of lessons. But the first lesson to do or to have is that sometimes the stories or the real life is much stranger than stories and novels. Stay with us tuned to the world of info, the world of books, coming live from Studio 3. You're still listening into the world of books, and we are coming live from Studio 3. Samuel Samer is on the controls. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk, and we have reached the final book by Aisha Sultan, an Emirati writer from Dubai, who has talked about notes about cities, traveling, and leaving. And this is an interesting book. It's full of articles that the author has written about and published in her newspaper, which is in Dubai. And what's interesting about the book is not just the way that she's describing from her own eyes places like, for us, we are part of our heritage, this I mean Cairo, or other cities that she has visited or that she has lived in, whether this was in Washington DC or in Germany. But what's important is what she has written about Dubai. How for her Dubai was, in the beginning, when she was born in the early 60s, a very small, humble city that was an important port, but it was not that big city as it is, and it was not high-tech as it was. And how her family has seen this metamorphosis, and how Dubai has changed through the years to such a big and a very successful cosmopolitan city, and at the same time high-tech city, during the lifetime of the author and of her family. And I think this is something that should be mentioned about these consecutive stories, and how the fact that she started traveling and seeing for herself the world through her eyes as a young child, as she started traveling to Europe and reaching the States and reaching everywhere almost to the world, seeing the East, the West, the North and the South, and always coming back to Dubai, carrying and reflecting her thoughts and her imagination, what should be told about the story of traveling. And of course, she was giving us some advice. She told us, please, do not take the opinion of others about cities that you are going to visit. Do not take their advice for granted. Don't you ever think that they will give you the right impression that they had, because sometimes the impression that you get from visiting a city is attached to a bad experience that you had or an illness that you suffered in, or a problem that happened to you in the hotel or whatever, and so you start hating the whole experience. So don't ask people what they think of this city or not this city, because for her, some of the most beautiful cities in the world, she didn't have any strong love or emotional involvement with them, simply because she had a bad experience about it. So you have to read about the books or read about what your cities that you are going to travel, but at the same time you don't have to give in to the opinion of your friends or your family or the people who are giving you thoughts and ideas about what they have seen during their own experience. And yes, she's telling us that definitely traveling will change you. And as they say, traveling has 7 benefits, as in the famous Arab saying, but definitely the most important benefit of traveling is that it changes you. It changes you definitely to the better, not to the worse, because it's going to expose you to a lot of things. Now, there are a lot of reasons in Arabic literature saying that this is a good time and you will gain knowledge, science, culture, and the company of friends. But yes, it has also other effects. Exposure and meditation that you have as you see different countries and different places. People who are living or walking right next to you, who are totally different than you are. And therefore, you will start to meditate and you start to accept the other. The people who travel a lot will definitely have a lot of what we can say open-mindedness. They become open-minded more than others. They are more capable of exchanging food for thought, and they are more definitely involved in seeing the others. And yes, there of course the geography and the environment that affects your travels, the experience that you are traveling in. For example, if you are traveling to a city that is completely rainy and during a very hard or a bad storm, the impression that you will have after leaving the city is not going to be as favorable as if you have seen this city in better times. So watching this definitely could help you in feeling this. And so, for example, for her, Paris, which is one of the most beautiful cities to me and to you and to a lot of people, was a bad experience for her in 2005. When she went there, it was extremely hot. There was a big hot wave, and Paris was almost occupied by tourists. And wherever you go, you have to stand in a queue to reach a place to have a coffee, or to go to a museum, or to sit for a lunch, or even to do some shopping. So this was a bad experience. You have chosen the wrong time to visit the city, and definitely you will not be happy as you are. And then there also should always mention the last pages of the book, because she was talking about what she misses at home when she's traveling. And yes, what she's missing at home is maybe a cup of coffee, and this is a family cup of coffee. And she is going towards Mahmoud Darwish, the famous Palestinian poet, who has written that what is he missing most in Palestine and all his life was, I really long for the bread of my mother and the coffee of my mother. So when we talk about traveling and going between cities and leaving your own home and coming back, you might end up with the same sentence that a famous Arab traveler said in very old times. And what satisfied me from going around the world is coming back home. وَلَقَدْ طَوَفْتُ بِالْآفَاقِ حَتَّى رَضِيتُ مِنَ الْغَنِيمَةِ بِالْإِيَابِ. This is a very interesting saying, that although you travel a lot, although you go around in different cities in the world, perhaps one of your happiest moments is when you come back to your home, to where you are used to be. So today was the world of info, the world of books. We presented 3 books: Salah Isa, The Men of Marg, Pharaoh the Last by Muntasir Amin, and Aisha Sultan, Notes about Cities, Traveling and Leaving. Hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK. Samuel Samir was at the controls. I hope to see you next week, same time, same station, from Radio Cairo. Have a beautiful weekend.